reintroducing overhead movements or movements that are more specifically shoulder dominant for someone that maybe has some fear around going overhead, previous injury, tear, or just overall is apprehensive about what it could be. So let's go through some of the ways that I like to kind of bridge the gap, teach a client without even realizing it, that we are okay to do so as long as we are cleared to do so. The first thing I like to do is honestly just use the lacrosse ball. And so what this is going to do is going to just get some sensation, some blood flow. We're hitting the mechanoreceptors, but I oftentimes will have them just take that, put it into their pec minor, wedge into a pull, and just press around, right? And then I'll have them kind of come up a little bit higher and then lower their body just a little bit more. And all I'm doing is I'm getting the arm used to being out here in space and getting the shoulder blade to actually kind of retract around the rib cage. So I'm getting a little bit more movement there, a little bit of stimulus and blood flow. I'm not breaking down scar tissues or anything. That's not a thing that is happening here. I'm not really loosening it up, but I'm saying, hey, there's some signals here. We're good to go. I'm just getting the arm used to being out here in space. Second thing I actually like to do is have the client do some back and forth juggling. Now we can start with overhand, just getting them a little bit more of the motor neurons to turn on, some proprioceptive awareness, or to signal, not turn on. And then if we can work on some single arm drops. And if we can have it so that it's outside that range that they can't even see, now we're really working a lot of the smaller muscles, but also we're just telling them, hey, let's work on our quickness and our reaction. We don't want to lose that. So we can either be out in front and alternate if they need to, or if we can have the arm directly out front, tell them we're working on some shoulder stability and quickness, and then eventually come on out of the peripheral vision so that we're focusing on more of these danger areas. So we get the shoulder more comfortable with being out there, and the brain knows now proprioceptively where the arm is in space. And oftentimes that's a reason it doesn't want to go there. And that's why that client feels very uncontrolled, is there's not a lot of safety that is occurring within that regard. Now you can take this really far if you're concerned about wanting to push that client. And you can have them do it from almost like this quadruped position where it is out in front, because now ultimately I am overhead. And so somebody that didn't want to be overhead may not be aware that this position, I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to have you reach out in front and go over here, right? Eventually you can either do it from a bird dog position. You can tell them it's working some core, and it's just an added little fun challenge, but we are getting that client overhead as long as they don't have any type of actual pain in that position. And so it may just take it away because now we're getting those quick responses that are happening. So this is a great tool to kind of just trick the brain more than anything else into being safe. What else am I going to do? I'd really like to use a down dog, up dog of any form, or a wall hinge, because ultimately I'm going to have the hands on a bar here or against the wall. I just like it on a bar or a bench because then I'm not having to push my palms in and I can just focus on the hinge. And what's really nice here is I'm mobilizing a little bit and I'm ultimately getting the arm up by the head, which they may believe they aren't able to do. And now I'm doing it passively and it is happening and we're able to go exactly where they want to be. Now, a couple other moves that I really like to focus on. I'll take a mini band and we'll do some marches up the wall. So I would be up against a wall and I'm marching my hands up the wall. Another one that you see often within PTs is they're going to do the finger crawls up the wall. Same concept. Works really great because they're only going to go as far as they feel safe. But with the mini band, they're pushing out, so they're getting a little bit more of that deltoid activation throughout the entire movement pattern. So we can really focus on building some stability and strength within the shoulders. Next one we can go with on many occasions is good old kettlebell, bottoms up press. And so we start by just having the client actually hold where they're feeling good. Eventually here, we can even go with a 90-90 position if that it doesn't cause any issues. We could just focus on grip strength, marching, we can walk with it. But ultimately, it's going to take away a lot of the fear of the arm being overhead as they're just focusing on grip, which is a great thing to do. And you're not going to be as aware of all of the other elements. We're not pressing it overhead. We're just isometrically holding. That also takes away some fear. All right, so here's one of my favorite go-tos. You're probably going to like this one. I focus on core. And so I love to give a good old-fashioned kettlebell dead bug. A lot of times, kettlebell goes directly over the chest. I tell them we're going to inhale as one leg comes out, arms go across. We're going to exhale, squeeze abs as we come back on in. Well, what am I doing here? So a lot of times clients that won't go overhead, but they really want to train core, I'm going to mix in some form of a pullover, right? It's going to work to have those arms slowly teaching how to stabilize when we're in a very stable position because we're on the floor to get those arms overhead. Works really well. I'm also going to use cables simultaneously with this to tag team, where I'm going to do a lat pull down. And if you think about it, we have to go here. Now they could start here and pulling back. Imagine I'm seated on a cable machine, lat pull down machine, and we're gonna pull through. But as they come up, I can teach them to get up underneath the actual lat pull down bar to get that stretch. So we're getting kind of a 2-for-1 that is happening with that regard. I'm gonna do the same thing with a pair of suspension straps while I have them doing a bridge row to kind of get the same movement pattern. These aren't gonna be perfectly straight because I'm gonna try and do them from this weird camera angle, but hopefully you can kind of understand. So ultimately, as I go down, I'm gonna let my hips drop. Well, I'm getting a nice stretch. So I'm almost in this angled position. Then I can come back up and I can do a row. Then I can hinge back on down, and then I can come back up and I can do a row. So again, I'm just trying as much as I possibly can to get a client comfortable with moving their arms through this range of motion that is typically safe. Usually we just want to press, we want to row right within this tiny little range from about 60 degrees to 120 degrees, right? But we ultimately, and that's called our exposure range, our expression range, because we can express the most power there instead of the exposure ranges, which are up here 120 to 180 or beyond, and then back here 60 to negative. And so those exposure ranges up here is where it feels unsafe. It's exposed. And we want them to get strong and stable within those as much as we possibly can. I'm also going to try and work core by doing some form of a fallout, because it's going to be the same thing as I just did with my dead bug, but now I can just control based on my weight. My arms come overhead and they come back on in. Same concept that I'm sneaking into these movement patterns, and it can even be from a real subtle one, but it needs to be in there in some capacity to help me get the arms overhead. I'm getting the lats to move, I'm mobilizing the scaps, and I can do it from a stability ball, from the knees. I can do it from an ab wheel if a client has the capacity to do so. Core-wise, I can do it from my suspension straps and be very high on up. I'm definitely throwing in my kettlebell dead bug. And so I'm completely focused on getting the client through all of these ranges without them realizing it. And then you obviously go with your traditional moves. Your traditional moves can be that you start out with a band single arm press. And then it can be much more of an angled press. Same thing with your landmine that you might have, where you're gonna press and you're gonna actually teach that reach underneath. Press and reach through, which is a really great one. Once the client gets really confident in pressing and reaching all the way through with a landmine, how do we do that last piece where we go overhead? Well, that's where either a Smith machine or a scrape the rack press works really well. So from here, I can use a really light bar and I can teach them to scrape the rack, come on through the bar, and push back on down. It's really stable. We don't even need weight, even with maybe a 15-pound bar, because we're gonna wedge it into the rig, so we're gonna take away that fear. It's just gonna drop down right onto the J-hooks or your safety spotter arms, and they're pushing into the rig, which is gonna elicit the most amount of strength from the movement. Anyways, they're creating their own friction to create their own tension to make it harder for them. So mix all of those things in. I promise you'll slowly get a client feeling much better with their shoulders, but also you'll get them feeling safe and confident around those moves.